You are listening to a different language. Some people say you are. Some call it Ebonics. That is a word that comes from ebony and phonics, and it has a separate grammar and vocabulary of its own. And its influence is growing. Los Angeles may be the next place to recognize the way that some African Americans speak not as slang or as a dialect, but as an entirely separate language. The Los Angeles school superintendent says his district may soon follow the example of Oakland, California School Board that yesterday declared Ebonics a legitimate and distinct language. Some examples: the use of words like bootsy to mean bad or awful, what's up for what's up, funna for going to, and hella for a lot or many. CNN's Charles Knapp looks at the Oakland decision and what may come of it.
Many Oakland, California African-American high school students think of themselves as bilingual.
Again, like it's in English, I would go, well, I have to go, I'm about to go home. Ebonics, I got to jet, I go to the heezy. It's a shortened way to communicate.
The test has been biased.
Wednesday night, the Oakland School Board officially declared Black English, or Ebonics, the primary language of its African-American students, who make up the majority of the district's school kids.
Like I was saying, that lady, she's very beautiful. And Ebonics go, man, she fine.
It's expected the school district will now seek state and federal money for bilingual education.
If that is the only way that we can receive funds to get the necessary tools for our children to learn standard English.
Okay, what does that mean?
Elementary school teacher Gwen DeBow is one of more than 100 Oakland teachers already developing and using a Black English curriculum.
I'm talking about it's a very different way of looking at how we instruct these children of color. It's coupled with character building, self-esteem, getting strong enough to try.
African-American students have, on average, the lowest grades of all groups in Oakland schools. Parents and educators agree something has to be done. But not everyone agrees the answer is to officially recognize Black English.
I tell you now, as an African-American linguist, clearly I have no investment in keeping my people down. However, facts are facts, and Black children, my cousins, are not bilingual. They are bidialectal, and that does not merit funding as bilingual people. It'd be an insult.
Really, with a new language that is like a form of slang that I was told is really not going to be accepted in this society.
In the past, the federal government has rejected the argument that Black English is a separate language. In fact, since 1981, the U.S. Department of Education has held a clear policy. The department holds the position that so-called Black English is a form of English and not a separate and distinct language, therefore not eligible for funding. The Oakland School District hasn't said exactly how it will implement English as a second language program, whether it will mean separate classes, more teachers, new books. For now, Oakland educators only say it's a start. Don Knapp, CNN, San Francisco.
Well, among other things, what the Oakland board has started is controversy. There is a great deal of argument over the existence of Ebonics, the way the school board plans to use it, and the wider implications. Joining us now to talk about this, Bella Rosenberg is the assistant to the president of the American Federation of Teachers. She joins us from Washington. And from Detroit, Geneva Smitherman, author of Black Talk and director of the African American Language and Literacy Program at Michigan State University. And Ms. Smitherman, let me start with you, first of all, in case there is still some confusion out there as to exactly what Ebonics is.
Ebonics is a language that comes from the Niger-Congo family of African languages that Black people have developed in all various parts of the world, and in particular here in the United States. We refer to this often as either Ebonics or African American Vernacular English.
Okay, but we do...
It has patterns of grammar, morphology and syntax, or in other words, grammar, from those Niger-Congo African family of languages, combined with words that people recognize as English.
So you're saying it's more than just a dialect?
Yes, no question. It's more than just a dialect.
All right, Ms. Rosenberg, do you agree with that?
I'm not a linguist, and you can find linguists who say that Black English is a language, and you can find others who say it's a dialect. It's an academic debate. As an educator, I have one concern and one concern alone, that children be taught standard English, because whether we like it or not, that is the language of success, that's the language of the marketplace, and that is the business of schools to do, to teach children standard standard English.
I don't think you would find anyone in their right mind who would say that the schools should not teach standard English to African American children. The point is, how should they teach it? How should it be done? And how should the school recognize what the children bring to the table? Because as long as you reject it, as we showed in the Ann Arbor case on Black English in 1979, in which the judge ruled in our favor and wrote into law many of the principles of scientific linguistics around Ebonics, if you reject what the children bring to the table, then you're not going to be able to teach them anything.
I don't think it's a question.
The Oakland School District has taken a bold and visionary step in recognizing the legitimacy of this language and teaching the children standard English.
When teachers correct students' English, whether that is an African American child or a white child, that is not rejecting something. That is doing their job, which is teaching them the English that we need to succeed in this world. It's always cast in the language of rejection. It's like when teachers correct an answer that is wrong in mathematics. Is that a rejection? Is that a put down of children?
It certainly
no,
has
that's
been,
an education.
I beg to differ. And you said you weren't a linguist, so therefore you're not familiar with the tremendous body of research that has been done in this field over 3 decades. In fact, in the Ann Arbor case,
that's correct, and neither is a single school board member in Oakland.
Not only was the children's school language in Ann Arbor rejected, they were in fact placed in learning disabilities classes, other words, special education.
Let me ask you both, let me jump in here if I can.
Let
me jump in here if I can, because I'd like to ask you both about the criticism that this is a thinly veiled attempt to get federal funds for the school districts that have declared Ebonics their main language. Your thoughts on that?
Well, the Los Angeles Unified School District, through a program that Noma Lemoyne established in 1991, has been doing for the past several years exactly what the Oakland School District has now mandated for their district. And they have been doing it in a number of schools with over some 30,000 children, 600 teachers involved. And they have not, as far as I know, and I think I'm up on top of this because I'm familiar with that program, they have not applied for federal bilingual funding, and I think
but that's their plan. That is their plan in the long run. And
I guess when I know this, but I think the issue really is for the federal government and all educational institutions to make educational funds available for all the children, not to pit one group against the other.
But as I understand it, what they're trying to do is apply for federal funds that will give them more money to teach standard English. So this is a way of doing that.
Well, that's the good news in all of this, and it's been obscured by the political...
I applaud it.
Wait, go ahead, Ms. Rosenberg.
Yeah, the good news in all of this is that ultimately this is a commitment to teaching standard English. And unfortunately, the school board has turned it into a political debate when it should be an academic debate among linguists. For every one linguist who will say it's a language, there's another one that will say it's a dialect. And all of this has to do with adults. It doesn't have to do with children. Frankly, it doesn't really matter if you classify it a language or a dialect when it comes to teaching children. What we're concerned about, and I think the Oakland School Board is concerned about this too, is how do we teach children standard English so they can succeed? There's absolutely no question that the distance
as I said earlier,
let me finish, please.
There's never, as I said earlier, no, because you cannot make this an argument about whether we should teach standard English or not.
I'm not making it an argument about that. I think we all agree.
The question is, as you said, and there's one thing we do agree on, we put the children first. Whether one considers Ebonics a language or a dialect, there certainly are significant enough differences as to make a difference in what happens with African American children in the classroom.
That is correct.
And that's the issue we have to deal with. How do we prepare young black people to be literate and to make it in the 21st century?
That is correct. And what is unfortunate is that the school board has wrapped this in a package so that that point is being obscured.
That wasn't obscured in the news media that we receive back here in the Midwest. Perhaps we have better news media sources back here.
Well, then on that point of agreement, let's let it go at that, and we'll continue to watch the story from here. But Bella Rosenberg and Geneva Smitherman, thank you both very much for being with us today. Luke?
Speak of some black youngsters is not a dialect, it's a language. That's what we'll be talking about today on Talk Back Live.
Tonight on Larry King Live, Sarah.
Hey, when you're in the business world, you got to talk regular English, so you won't get ahead nowhere.
Did you ever think there would be an argument where Jesse Jackson and Rush Limbaugh wound up on the same side? Ebonics is it. It's about talking, so we invite you to talk back. Hello and welcome. I'm Susan Rook with a very sincere wish for your holiday happiness. This is Talk Back Live, CNN's first interactive talk show, and today we are talking about language and something called Ebonics, which the Oakland, California school system says some of its students speak.
We want students in Oakland schools to be proficient in English and to ensure that they are able to make the transitions from whatever language they bring to school to English and are therefore able to function effectively in our schools.
I feel that the situation for African Americans are hard as it is, and that really with a new language that is like a form of slang that I was told is really not going to be accepted in this society ever, and it really will just make us more inferior, I feel, to other people who are going to view this issue.
I think it's insulting. It's not a separate language. It's not just, oh, this is black people's English over here and these people's English over there. It's all English.
Joining us to talk about this way of talking, Lucilla Harrison, president of the Oakland School Board, who is in our San Francisco Bureau. Thank you for joining us. We sure appreciate it. Also, in Detroit, Geneva Smitherman, director of Michigan State's African American Language and Literacy Program, and also the author of Black Talk. Thank you also for being here. Professor, let's start with you. And so we start out from a common definition from which to work from, the definition of Ebonics.
Yes, Ebonics is a form of language that was derived from the interaction of languages of the Niger-Congo family with, in this case, English. It has patterns of grammar, pronunciation, different meanings for words, different styles of communication from what we know in this country as standard mainstream English.
Okay, to Ms. Harrison, a question from you from Anjan.
What exactly is the objective of programs such as the Oakland City program, for example?
The objective of Oakland Public Schools is to teach students standard English. That is our goal.
Okay, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Todd, to you.
How are they going to teach the Ebonics? Are they going to have textbooks? Are there going to be scholarly writings? How are they going to achieve that?
We have a program in California right now that's called the Standard English Proficiency Program. It is working quite well in Oakland schools as well as in schools in Los Angeles. We are going to use that model as the model to teach the English Proficiency Program.
How will it actually work?
I think that if I could just say one word in here very quickly to embellish on that, what it sounds like to me that the Oakland School District is doing is going from the known to the unknown, which is the standard way that we teach any subject matter in school. We go from what people know to what we want them to know. And in the case of language, you use the mother tongue to go to a target language or a different language. It's fairly common in ways of teaching other languages. It just becomes all complicated when we introduce the factor of Ebonics, which has to do with race.
Very good point, well taken, and several people in the audience, when we were talking before the show, you know, it just raises a feeling of uncomfortableness. And Sheila, you were the ones that raised your hands. Why does this make you feel uncomfortable? Why do you say, no, I don't think it sounds like a good idea?
Well, I'm sure I don't know enough about it yet. What my question is how will you train the teachers to begin with to speak in Ebonics to then, obviously the point is to teach children proper English. So how do you start is the question.
Okay. Ms. Harrison?
We're not going to start by teaching the teachers Ebonics. That is not the goal. We will teach teachers to use strategies to move youngsters who come to us speaking Ebonics or black language or whatever you want to call it, to move them from where they are to standard English.
But I read somewhere that teaching the teachers that were not familiar with it was part of it, so that they could have a starting point also from which to move forward from.
We want teachers to know the history of the language. We want teachers to know why children speak the way that they are speaking when they come to us, and to move them from their own language to standard English. And you can't do that unless you know what you're teaching.
I think it's very important for teachers to understand the language that the students are using, to know what it is they're saying when they speak, and also to understand that this language has a system and it doesn't show cognitive deficiency, it doesn't show that the kids are retarded or whatever. You know, in my own personal life, I'm one of the people that in elementary school was put back a half a year, at least temporarily, because of the way I spoke. I had to prove myself. Then as a young adult in college, I was forced to take speech therapy because of speaking African American English. And this has nothing to do with my intellect, which is quite high, if I say so myself, but it has to do with the attitudes that people have about this language that they know nothing about. So it seems to me what Oakland is doing is very wise. They're trying to teach the teachers what these linguistic forms are, where they come from, the fact that there's a system and a pattern to it, there are rules to this language, so that they will then have a proper perspective as they try to teach the kids and move them towards the language of wider communication, or so-called standard English.
James has a comment that he wanted to make.
Yes,
Go ahead.
I'm wondering what we're training these kids for now. We are preparing these kids for the future to find their workplace. And you can't put this and that on an application and expect anybody to hire those kids. So why not just stay with plain English?
Well, I mean, absolutely. People have to know the language of wider communication, and that's not only African people, but also people of color, white people. I mean, people in this country, the language of wider communication, standard English. Everyone needs to know that in order to be prepared for the 21st century. So I think that there's no hesitation and no misunderstanding that these children will be exposed to and learning standard English. The fact of the matter is, if you don't start where the child is, then you can't take her where you want her to go. And this is what the people are trying to do in Oakland, and they've done this in other parts of the country. I just might add, there's about a 20-year history of different school districts experimenting with what Oakland is now doing in individual schools across the country.
And does it work?
And it absolutely does work. There's all kinds of research data that shows that when teachers are exposed to this perspective, when they understand the history of Ebonics, when in fact the students themselves understand their own history and the language that they're speaking, they're much more open to learning something new and different. Absolutely works.
James has a follow-up. Go ahead.
In school, we used to speak what you call Pig Latin, and that was a black language. Are you going to teach that in this class?
We're not teaching.
Well, I'm just asking the question.
We're not teaching Pig Latin. We're not teaching Ebonics. We're not teaching anything except standard English. But what we do want is our youngsters to come to school and to not feel that they are inferior because they do not speak standard English. We will not devalue the child because they do not come to us with standard English.
We have heard from some of the opposition, certainly in our audience. Now we will hear from the opposition, professional opposition to this, a woman who calls Ebonics another lie that has been taught to our children. Your chance to talk to her after this.
I'm going, well, I have to go, I'm about to go home. Ebonics, I got a jet, I go to the Heezy. It's a shortened way to communicate.
The very idea that African American language is a language separate from can be very threatening because it can encourage young men and women not to learn standard English.
Welcome back. We are talking about Ebonics with Oakland School Board President Lucille Harrison and Michigan State Professor Geneva Smitherman. Joining us now from our Los Angeles Bureau, Isola Foster, President of Americans for Family Values. We've heard some of the complaints from folks here in our audience. What is your main complaint with Ebonics in Oakland school system?
Ebonics is just another one of those lies that's being taught to our young children and to America about blacks here in America. First of all, our children are American, not Africans. Most of our children know nothing about the African continent. They don't know what country they're supposed to be from on that continent, but instead we have had our children taught an African American flag, an African American allegiance. We've even had a made-up celebration like Kwanzaa, which just came from the top of the head of some supposedly black leader, and now is celebrated as though it has some legitimacy to it. So what we have now is a made-up English slang or whatever you want to call it, but it's made up, and it is now supposed to be for all African American children or all black children. This is an insult to all blacks everywhere, but particularly to our children. It is the job of education to correct and to teach, and not to promote this kind of garbage. That's just terrible.
Professor Smitherman, I'd like you to respond to that, and also in doing so answer Craig's question. Craig, go ahead.
I was just wondering if this is really a black language that had black origins, or if it's really just the language of white, black, Hispanic, urban street youth.
There's so many things wrong with what that sister just said that I don't even know where to start. You told me we only have a short amount of time, so let me try to start here. For about 30 years now, there's 30 years of research from linguists all over the country, both black and white linguists, and also outside of the United States, showing that there is a system of language that goes back at least to the period of enslavement, that is a mixture of Niger-Congo syntactical patterns overlaid with, in this case, English words. It is not an insult. It is a fact that some 80 to 90% of African Americans use these particular patterns of language, but many of them also use the language of wider communication. To use the term black language is somewhat inaccurate unless by black you are referring to the Niger-Congo family of African languages. If you call those black languages such as Yoruba, Igbo, Efi, and so on, then if that's the sense in which you're using black, then you can say that it is a quote-unquote black language. This is why the term Ebonics, I think, is a perfect term that's actually been around since 1973.
Well, the fact of the matter is that slaves came from many tribes, and each tribe had a different language. So there is no such thing as a common language for slaves and for blacks in America. And our children were born and raised in America. Their culture is American culture. And to say that they have a separate language, and especially this kind,
it would help if you
it's
could
just
read
totally
some of
ridiculous.
this literature that exists in the library and that also exists right out there in California where you are. In fact, the foremost
you guys are good at making up literature.
In this country is right there at UCLA, Claudia Mitchell-Kernan. Just call up and ask her to tell you about Ebonics. She was doing research on this over 30 years ago.
Well, wait, let's see how it applies to us today, because it's really stirring up a lot of controversy in Oakland. Jesse is joining us from India. Jesse, go ahead.
Wouldn't it be disadvantageous for blacks to learn in Ebonics, since most educational resources are available only in standard English, and also the language for trade and commerce is in standard English? So.
Now, this is the fact I think that people keep missing. The speakers of Ebonics already know that language. Ebonics was my first language. I already know that language. These children are not being taught that language. They already know that. That's their mother tongue. The purpose of the school is to teach them the target language, just what you just said, the language of wider communication of business, commerce, and industry.
Tony is disagreeing with you. Tony in our audience is disagreeing with you. He's from New York.
I disagree. I don't think it's a language that we already knew or know, or something that we were born with. It was innate. This is something that
Notice I did not
as a
say
black
innate.
person.
Those are your words, not mine. I would not, as a linguist, I don't say that. I did not say that.
Well,
they
I'm
were
trying to
born
understand
with
what you've stated, and I'm saying that I listen to even my kids, and I have a hard time understanding them based on what they're using from the kids out in the street. I have to decipher that to find out what the heck they're saying.
People are not born with a certain language. People are not born with the language. No people, African people or any other people, Europeans. You learn language from your parents, from your peers, kids you play with when you're young, from like caregivers, babysitters, and so on. So language is learned from the culture and the community that people are born into. Nobody is born with a certain language. So those people are saying that Ebonics is genetic. That's just absolutely unscientific, and that's wrong. No linguists have ever said that.
I'm not sure that's what Tony's saying. So, Tony, you get a chance to talk again. We've got to take a break right now. So you're first out of the break, and then a bunch of other people. Sheila, you betcha. And we'll be back after this.
Our students do not come to us speaking standard English. We are saying that we want to acknowledge that and move students from that language to standard English.
Welcome back. Our subject is Ebonics, and in that soundbite we just heard the reference was made to standard English. So we're talking about the whole issue of whose standards, who decides what is standard. And Tony, you were listening to that, and we've been talking throughout the break. I promise you the first word coming back, but when you're talking to your kids and you say, I want them to speak proper English, who do you mean? What standard are you talking about?
What I like them to speak to me in a manner in which I'm accustomed, in a manner in which I've attempted to train them. I've gone through school. I'm a graduate of the University of Rochester, and I understand that this is, quote unquote, you're in America now. America speaks English. Let's speak English.
How old are your kids? Are they teenagers?
My kids presently are 19 and 15 years of age.
But isn't that the job of a teenager, to do things that make you mad as a parent? Isn't that their sole purpose in life?
Well, yes, I agree with you. And I also agree that this language thing should start and take place in the home.
Very good point. Michael, you wanted to make a comment about talking about whose standard is it?
Yeah, I think it's just going to cause division between blacks and whites, actually. I think this whole issue is just, it'll be hard for us to work together if we creating this whole standard and all this other stuff, just a division, you know. I'd rather work together. I'd rather just speak English, you know.
And I am so
Let's go ahead. Let's go back and get the view from Ms. Harrison. What about that? Michael's concerned about this.
Oh, well, I'm concerned about this also, and I think that people like Izola Foster, I'm surprised that she does not know that the Standard English Proficiency Program has been successful in the state of California. For the young man, there are a lot of young people who cannot speak standard English. We see them every day. We see them on the Jenny Jones show, being made fun of, laughed at by America. We see them on Jerry Springer. We do not want that to happen to the children in Oakland. When they get to be teenagers, we want them to to be able to speak standard English, and if they speak slang, they can speak slang and then revert back to standard English. That's our goal.
And well, one of your compatriots, Laura, now Laura's from Illinois, but Laura is also a teacher, and you have a concern. Go ahead.
At the current time, I have students talking Ebonics as a means of deception, and I don't know what they're saying in my classroom. As an English teacher, I want to teach them standard English, but I also want to understand them. I'm confused. I don't know what to do.
I tell you what to do. You teach them standard English. That's the job of teachers, to teach correct grammar.
But I don't understand.
That is the job of the teacher. Then you ask them what they mean. If they say something to you that seems out of the ordinary, ask them to explain it and then tell them the correct way to express themselves using the same sentence, but the correct way. That's the way to do it.
But I'm afraid I'm going to turn off my students.
You don't turn off students when you tell them right from wrong. That's the problem our students are having today. No one wants to tell them right from wrong. There's a right way to speak. Slang can be used on the playground. Use slang on the street, but not in the classroom.
Well, this teacher has asked for some help, and I don't think what was said will not help her. She's saying, I don't understand the patterns that they're using. I want to teach them standard English. How do I get an entree into that?
The same way she teaches any other student.
You would never help anybody. So how she gets an entree into that, what I'm saying to the teacher that wants to help, is there are some guides that have been written that show you what the translations are from what the student is using to the standard English, and you can get some of those guides. Oakland may have some now, I'm not sure, but I know they have them in the Los Angeles Unified School District program. And what you can do is look at the patterns that the child is using and show them how to say that same thing in the target language. So for example, if a child may say to you, "She be here," and the person they're talking about is not even present. What do they mean? They do not mean she is here at the moment, because the person might not even be there at the moment. But if they say she be here, that's an aspectual sense of language that you get from Niger-Congo languages, which have survived in Ebonics. And what that means is that the person has a habit of being in this certain place. Even though she is not here at the moment, she will probably be here next week, or she was probably here last week, because that's what she be here means. Now, if you know that that's what the person is saying, and you have to have some understanding of their language to know that, then you can tell them, okay, how do we convey that same idea in the language of wired communication? So you have to say something like, she is not here at the moment, but occasionally she is here. Or she is not here at the moment, but generally she is here.
Gary,
you have to show them how to say the same thing in the standard language, but you can't show them that if you don't understand what they mean when they say she be here.
I see you shaking your head, Ms. Foster. We'll come to you in just a second. I want to bring in Gary. He's on the phone from Massachusetts, and he has been patiently waiting. Gary, go ahead.
Yes, I think this decision was wrong to teach this black English in school. What happens when these kids get into the work environment and they have to deal with management and customers and
Gary,
other co-workers? They're not going to understand what they're saying.
Gary, hold on. Let me just kind of clarify something, because I think a lot of people have had a misconception about what's going on here. It is not teaching. Oakland is not talking about teaching the language. They are talking about giving the teachers access, like people like Laura, access to the language so that they can provide translation. Now, Gary, in line of that, do you have a problem with that?
Yeah. How does the rest of society know how to translate this type of language, this Ebonics? I'm 32 years old. I work at a printing company, and I deal with all kinds of people. And I hear these black kids talking this Ebonics, this street slang. I don't understand half of what they're saying.
Ms. Harrison, final word for you. What about that rest of society?
That we're not teaching Ebonics. That's what everyone is confused about. We are teaching youngsters in the language that they bring to us to move to standard English. I do not think that we ought to be so upset about that until we see whether it works or not. We have had some success. We have the Standard English Proficiency Program in 26 of our schools. Los Angeles has a project 10 in 10 of their elementary schools. We're starting at the elementary level to teach youngsters how to speak standard English,
and
so that when they become teenagers, they will know if they want to use slang, they can use it, but they will also know how to use standard English.
And that is the final word. We thank you so much for joining us. We sure appreciate it. Time now to check in with Joey Chen in the CNN newsroom for the very latest, and to thank Oakland School Board President Lucilla Harrison for joining us today. When we come back, more on Ebonics. Does it have a future? And if it does, where's it going next? welcome back. We do hope you're having a wonderful holiday and joining our discussion of Ebonics. Let's welcome Jeff Horton, President of the Los Angeles City Board of Education. He joins Isola Foster and Geneva Smitherman. Thanks to all of you for being here. And, oh, sorry. I heard shouting. We're having a lively conversation here with everybody in the audience. And Sheila, go ahead. You wanted to make a comment. We're sending it to the gentleman.
Yeah. My grandparents spoke only Yiddish, but they made sure that it was important for my mother and her sisters and brothers to speak correct English because they were now living in America, and that's what you do. And I think if other, as the young lady said before, if other immigrants could come here and learn what we're calling correct English, I think that anybody should.
Jeff?
Susan? Yeah, I think a lot of the time here in this discussion, we're on the wrong topic. There's no disagreement among any of us that the goal for every student has to be to learn standard English. I mean, that's our goal in Los Angeles. I heard the Oakland board members say that. I mean, that's everybody's goal, so that's not in dispute. I also think that it's not an appropriate debate to have among school boards as to whether or not Ebonics is a separate language. I think that's a debate for linguists. I don't think, as a board member in Los Angeles, I don't think that it is a good idea to designate it as a separate language because it only increases the sense of separateness and of isolation between African American students and others. But I do feel that a good teacher has to assess where her or his students are and not just teach the same way regardless of who happens to march into their room, but to know where they're coming from and build the curriculum and the techniques and the ways that the teacher teaches around what that student brings to the classroom or what those students do. And so that's why in Los Angeles we have a program that's about 6 years old now where we try and teach teachers about the ways that African American students speak, Black English or Ebonics. We don't teach in that language, and we don't recognize it as a separate language, but I don't think that's the point. The point is, how best do you teach students? We have programs that teach students who speak different languages. We have programs that teach students that speak different varieties of non-mainstream English, and there's another large group of Hispanic students who don't speak Spanish, who speak often sort of non-mainstream English called Spanglish, and they need to have variations in how we teach for them. And that's what we should be talking about in school boards and with teachers, is how best to teach different groups of students and different students, all of whom we want to reach the same goal of literacy and fluency in standard English.
We've been blessed today by having a whole bunch of students, students and teachers in the audience. Lorraine, you're a teacher. How long have you been teaching?
I've been teaching about 11 years in elementary school primarily, and my question is, they already have the English as a second language program established and underway, and the teachers that I know that teach this work with Spanish, Vietnamese, people from all over the world who come not knowing English. Would it be possible, as she was saying, that this teacher would have to be trained in the history and the language of all these students?
No, because there is no history to this. That's the fallacy of it. There's no such thing as an African American language. That's stupid. That's the thing we're trying to get you to see. We have a lot of doublespeak here. You have people who are saying we're not pushing this, but if this is the way African American children talk. We are from different regions, and you have dialect. That's what it is.
I agree
and that's
with you.
what you talk about, but you don't talk about a language for all children of a particular race. That is just totally ridiculous.
Professor?
I think that I've got so many things I want to say here. One thing that's really important to note is to keep the focus on the youth. We are trying to move a new generation of African American youth that will not suffer as the way I had to suffer because of the way I spoke, so that they can move to levels of language and literacy for the 21st century. And I think it's very disturbing to me. I don't know if your audience could see what we were seeing in the studio here, but the statistic of 71% of the African American youth in Oakland being in special education classes, that has to change. And one of the bases for putting children in special education classes and in learning disabilities classes, as was done in the Ann Arbor Black English case, is language. And what happens is then you're holding the kids back. You're not advancing their language and literacy skills. So I think that's an important statistic that has to change and that has to be addressed. And it seems to me these programs are addressing it.
Amy,
now, on the matter on the matter of the fact of African American language, I can only repeat for your audience there, Susan, it's very important that they know that there's a serious body of scientific research that goes back over 30 years that's been done by scientific linguists that show the scientific basis of the language patterns that are spoken by African people in this country and also by African people in Jamaica, other parts of the Caribbean, and so on, by Africans intermingling with the French language and so on. And there's an important scientific body of literature that people need to know about and to be exposed to. And one of your audience people did in fact ask, I was very interested to hear that question about how could white people, he said he talks to a lot of black teenagers, how could he learn about the language of African Americans? I think that's a very forward-thinking look, if indeed he were serious about that, because it would be important for white people to learn something about African American language.
Ms. Foster, I see you shaking your head. We've got to take a break. I promise you'll get the first word when we come back. And I also want to introduce you to Amy. She is 12 years old, just moved here from up north. We'll do further research and find out where up north. She is in 7th grade and has a comment about all of this. We will take a break. We will be back after this. From some of the young people in our audience. We're going to go to Rebecca in just a second. We're going to start with Amy, 12 years old, 7th grade, just moved here from the north.
I just wanted to say that when I moved down here, it was really hard for me to understand my teachers when in the classroom.
Because?
Because they have the southern accents and I wasn't used to that.
Ah, and how long have you lived here?
1 year.
Okay, how about now?
It's much easier now that I'm used to it.
Okay. Y'all really threw you, didn't it? Yeah, being from up north, you thought it was a boat tilting over. Amy, sorry, Rebecca, go ahead. You wanted to make a comment?
Yeah, I'm 16 years old, and I have a lot of friends who are black and from other cultures. But the thing is, they tell me they know how to speak proper English, and it's not that this is Ebonics, this is another language. A lot of them speak proper English, and this is just a way for them to shorten it, to be obnoxious practically, and say, well, we're going to speak improper English just to get attention. And they do it just to get attention.
Susan?
Nobles is from Tennessee. Young man, you're a teenager. What do you think of what Rebecca just said? Any validity?
Well, I think a lot of us do know how to speak the common language, but I think Ebonics is just laziness, really. On how to speak English, it's just laziness. Like dropping the G and like talking or walking.
Susan?
Mr. Horton, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to focus this, if I could, on what's the best way to teach young people. I mean, that's what the Oakland board, I think, wanted to get at. Now, I happen to think it's a mistake to call Ebonics a separate language, that reinforces a sense of separateness. But I do not think it's a mistake to respect the way children talk and to find the best way to teach them. And any teacher will tell you that the best way to teach is not to constantly be telling a child that he's wrong or inferior or what he does is stupid or lazy. The best way to teach is to say to that child, well, you can talk at home or with your friends any way you want, but here's the way that you're going to have to talk in university, here's the way you're going to have to talk in a job interview, and to move them that way. But disrespecting a child constantly is not the best way to teach them. And I'm sorry to hear that tone creep into this, but I'd like everybody to focus on how best are we going to teach children and move them into literacy and fluency in standard English.
Joyce has a comment she wants to make. Go ahead, Joyce.
I want to say that
I agree with Ms. Foster. I don't think it's a matter of being lazy. I don't think Ebonics is a matter of a rebellion. I did say that when I was a teenager many years ago, we spoke Ebonics. It was something between us. It was our little way of being together and speaking among ourselves. Now, when the time came for us to go out for a job or for English, we knew how to speak. We knew how to carry ourselves. We didn't have a problem. I think that they're just making a little bit too much out of that.
I think
Professor, are you making too much out of it?
Well, I think...
Professor, are you making too much out of it?
The fact of the matter is that some 85 to 90% of people of African descent in this country, at some point in time in their lives, they speak the patterns of Ebonics. And it's not just words like fat or nose open, which are slang kind of terms that young people use. It is also the patterns of syntax, morphology. There's patterns of grammar and pronunciation that come from those Niger-Congo African language family groups. And the fact of the matter is that a number of African people not only speak that language, they also speak a lot of other pure African languages, and they also speak pure European languages, and they also speak standard English. We're talking about a multilingual population moving out from a narrow provincial way of thinking and talking.
And how do we get from here to there? We have got to take a break. Final thoughts after this. If you're in the Atlanta area, for free tickets, call 1-800-410-4CNN. We are back. Final comments. Powell, I'm going to start with you. How old are you?
I'm 12.
7th grade?
Yes, ma'am. And I was just wondering, why wouldn't it be disconcerting to the students to have the teachers trying to speak to them in this way? Obviously, from what has been said, this is not the way that the teachers are speaking naturally. And I was wondering, whenever my teachers try to speak to me in a teenage dialect, it's insulting. And I just don't think that that would be an effective way of teaching.
Professor, I'm going to toss that to you.
Yeah, the teachers will be using, they will model the target language. That is, they will use the language of wider communication or standard English themselves. They will not be using the teenagers' talk. The fact is for the teachers to understand, however, what it is that the young speakers of Ebonics are saying, so that they can say, oh, let me show you another way to say what you mean by that phrase.
Steve has a comment. Go ahead, Steve.
Yes, my comment is that I think there's a big difference between Ebonics and slang language, and I think that Ebonics is something that you just improperly speak English, like you mentioned before, and I think it's a good thing that the school is trying to do something about that, and that when you use slang language, that's something that kids do all the time. I did when I was going to school, and you can change up back and forth when you use slang language, and I think schools should incorporate some type of program where they do not allow that in the school. So if a kid is speaking that way, the school should correct that student, or if the student continue to do that, should get the parents involved.
Yeah, Kendra, what do you think? You're also a student. How old are you?
I'm 15.
15. So what do you think about all this conversation?
Well, like she was saying over there, she knows people who speak that language and know how to speak properly. And I know people like that too. And then I know some people who don't know how to speak properly, and they need to be corrected. They don't need somebody to be trying to understand them. They need someone to correct them. Because my mother, she's from Mobile, Alabama, and I'm from Maryland, and they talk differently. But and they like say ain't and all this other stuff, and then when my mother, when she hears me saying that, she'll correct me because she knows that's not the correct language. And I think they should be teaching you the proper way to talk and not trying to help you understand them.
Ms. Foster, I gather you would agree with Kendra from Maryland.
I couldn't have said it better, but you know what? Tolerating slang and street language is why we have so much profanity in our schools now. We should not tolerate it, and we should correct. The greatest respect a teacher can give a student is to correct that student. And as far as money and programs has been tried, billions of dollars have been spent to educate since 1965 black and minority children. So the fault lies with the school, a great deal with the school, and they talk about the different programs. I heard your Oakland superintendent or board member there talked about programs such as Project 10 in Los Angeles. Project 10 is a homosexual recruitment program. That has nothing to do with Ebonics, I hope. But I don't know why that was even mentioned.
Susan, I think you should correct that.
That's another show.
Well, it sure is, and I'd be glad to come home.
Professor to you. You get the final word. Go ahead.
She said the program was SEP, Standard English Proficiency Program. That is not a homosexual recruitment program. I mean, you should chill on the
Mr. Horton, you get the final word real quick.
Real quick on the, I think she meant the 10 schools program, which was targeted at 10 primarily, used to be African American, now Latino schools. But I just want to bring us back to the best way to teach children. And I do not think, and I was an English teacher in a predominantly black high school for 15 years before I was elected to the school board, it does not work to just constantly correct students and tell them they're wrong. That does not work, and if a teacher teaches that way, I think they're doing a disservice.
And we have heard that message, and we thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're out of time. That is all the time that we have for today. Thanks to all of our guests, our audience here, and thanks to you. Tomorrow, January 7th, is D-Day for Newt Gingrich. You know that. Will the Speaker of the House be able to survive ethics violations and keep his job as a top Republican? Ted Dexter up next with a wintry weather forecast, followed by Inside Politics. Coming up today. Well, okay. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Controversy over Ebonics continues, but a prominent group of linguists is applauding the Oakland School Board's decision to use Ebonics to help teach standard English. In fact, they say it's a decision based on tried and true techniques. ABC's Ron Claiborne has more.
Meeting this weekend in Chicago, the Linguistic Society of America approved a resolution commending the Oakland, California School Board for its plan to incorporate black dialect, Ebonics, in school curricula.
Now, in English, how is this word pronounced?
Several leading American linguists say the board's decision was supported by research.
There's experimental evidence to show that not only for the United States, but also for Sweden and a number of other countries, kids can be helped to master the standard language when the non-standard language or vernacular is taken into account.
Why ain't people the same color?
The theory, held by many linguists, is that it's more effective to use the child's own dialect as a kind of bridge to regular English, rather than ignoring that dialect and immersing the child in standard language.
Is that Ebonics or standard English? Ebonics.
Using so-called bridge dialect is not a new theory. It was tested and validated by a 1977 study in which researchers began teaching 400 black school children using textbooks in their dialect. The students then moved on to transition texts with less dialect, and finally to books only in standard English. According to the study, these children showed significantly larger gains in reading skills than a group taught in the traditional way.
All things being equal, yes. If you use something familiar to you as a bridge to something unfamiliar, that seems to be a sound learning principle.
In English, you get fold. When you say it in English, you get fold. Okay,
A principle that most linguists say should be given a chance to work. Ron Claiborne, ABC News, Chicago.
What's all this talk about talk? What's up with this here Ebonics? What are schools doing with your tax dollars? Stand by to talk back.
Talk Back Live, CNN's interactive talk show here at CNN Center in Atlanta. I'm Susan Rook. Well, the person you just heard is one of our guests today. You will meet her in just a moment. But first, a lot has been said about Ebonics or Black English or Black Talk.
Today, we are going to cut through all of the rumors and get down to the real issues.
We are not talking about teaching Ebonics in LAUSD, period.
The Los Angeles Board of Education says its goals are misunderstood. School officials are proposing that teachers should have an awareness of Black English when they teach English to Black students.
We value the child, we value what he brings, and we use that language to move him to standard English.
As people look at what we're really going to do in the classroom, I think it's hard not to support it.
While the concept has been in practice for years at many schools, Ebonics has its critics.
I think it make us look stupid.
I think there's no such thing as Ebonics. It's just called mainly slang, and I don't think they should be calling it Black English because there's no such thing as Black English to me.
Protesters in Los Angeles suggest Ebonics has more to do with money than education.
This is about the money. This is about selling out the Black children and their future for the almighty federal dollar.
The Oakland, California School Board meets tonight to approve the way a controversial resolution supporting Ebonics has been reworded. It will no longer refer to Ebonics as the primary language of most Black students, and the dialect will not be classified as, quote, genetically based. Well, what was the motivation behind the Black English resolution to begin with? Here to talk about that issue and much more, Geneva Smitherman. She is a distinguished professor of English at Michigan State University, where she is the director of the African American Language and Literacy Program. She has also written a book called Black Talk. Geneva, nice to see you again. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you. And in Washington, Susan Crabtree. She is senior political writer at Insight Magazine. Susan, welcome to the program. We're glad you're here.
Thanks for having me.
Geneva, we're going to do the first, like we did the last time we talked about Ebonics. Let's get some definitions out of the way. We're going to go to Bob with the first question. Go ahead, Bob.
Yes, my question is, what exactly is the accepted definition of Ebonics?
Ebonics may be defined as a form of language used by people of African descent throughout all parts of the world where there is a mixture of African languages and European languages. The version of Ebonics that's here in the United States, linguists typically refer to as African American Vernacular English or Black English, or also Ebonics. It's a combination of the surviving patterns from African languages with the European English that our ancestors picked up during enslavement. I think it's important to just say real quickly, if I may, that a lot of the talk has equated slang with Ebonics. This is not correct. Slang, or the current hip-hop slang or language, may be a part of Ebonics. You may think of it as a part of Ebonics, but it's a very small part. We're basically talking about patterns of grammar, patterns of pronunciation, patterns of morphology, that is, ways to indicate meaning through the system of language.
Susan, I'm going to bring you in just a second, but we want to get some of these definitions down first. Rosalind, you had a follow-up question to that. Go ahead.
My question is, what exactly is the substance of the Ebonics proposal out of Oakland?
Geneva, go ahead.
Yes, well, the proposal is to recognize these language patterns as legitimate and valid. They're already legitimate and valid by the speakers of Ebonics, but to recognize this, for the school to recognize that these are legitimate patterns of language, that they don't show that the children are retarded or deficient in any kind of way, and to use that recognition and that understanding of the language the children bring to school as a bridge to teach them the language of wider communication, or so-called standard English.
Susan, what is wrong with that goal, as stated?
Well, I don't think that I think that the school board may be having a communication problem of its own, really it's been very vague about what it's going to do with this program, whether it's going to, how much money they're going to be spending, how many teachers they're going to be training, what are the training courses are they going to take teachers out of their normal daily time with their students to teach them this? And where is the money going to?
Or are you against it in principle?
Well, I'm also against it in principle, but I think that it's already been instituted in several of the school board districts across the country. Los Angeles has a program, Texas has had a program in the past, and Oakland currently has a program right now that is already spending $200,000. What they want to do, from what I understand, is expand the program to district-wide, and how much money is that going to mean? And I think that people in California, I think you have to look at this in a broader context with what's going on in education in California, and that the citizens are very skeptical about educational programs of late, and they, as well they should be, especially when it affects their pocketbook.
Geneva, a couple more definitions from you. Dolores has a question that she wants to ask. Go ahead.
Yes, it was my understanding that Ebonics actually evolved from England as a dialect hundreds of years ago, and I was wondering if that was right.
What we do know about Ebonics is that the patterns of these West African languages, Igbo, Yoruba, and so forth, were used as the basic structure upon which European English words were added, shall we say, or pronunciations. There are certain patterns in Ebonics which obviously reflect patterns from the languages of the UK, the dialect of the UK, but there are also certain other patterns in Ebonics which you don't find in those British dialects. For example, the pattern copula absence, as in my mama not home. You do not find that pattern in the dialects of Old and Middle English, nor in Standard American English. That's a pattern that Ebonics has maintained that comes from or is derived from African languages.
Today we're joined by an audience at the Information Age exhibit at the Smithsonian Institution. Valeska's joining us. Hey, Valeska.
Hi there. You know, I'm really intrigued by the concept of Ebonics. I'm just wondering whether that label is going to further ostracize African American children in school.
Well, it's interesting. The label Ebonics was developed in 1973 by a group of black scholars at a conference, and subsequently there was a book that was published under the title of Ebonics in 1975, which presented the conference papers. And one of the real concerns of the scholars at that conference was the fact that the term Black English, which had been used in the literature up to that point, that this term had certain negative overtones which many members of the African American community did not like. And so they were searching for a term that would be acceptable to the African American community and that would also show the linkage between the language spoken by blacks in the United States to the language spoken by black people in the Caribbean, in parts of West Africa, and throughout the whole what's called the African diaspora. And Ebonics was the term that captured these common language patterns that African people throughout the whole diasporic world share.
We have got to take a break at this point, but I think we've established the underlying principles involved in the discussion pretty well, so we're going to ask, what is the real motivation here? Educating children or getting federal money for a bilingual classification? Ask a woman from the LA Unified School District. That and more next. $3 million is a lot of money to invest, but what if there was federal money to help offset that expense? Is the real goal here getting federal funds or teaching children standard English? To help answer that, we now welcome on the phone Noma Lemoyne from the Los Angeles Unified School District. Now, as we may have mentioned before, LA is also considering an Ebonics resolution similar to Oakland's, but Mona, your school district has experience with it that Oakland doesn't have at this point, right?
Well, the motion that the Los Angeles Unified School District is considering at the moment is merely a motion to expand the programs that we currently have in existence. Just as a matter of clarification.
Okay. You know, hold on just a second, because I want to go to Susan. And Susan, apparently what I got from what you were saying, that that you are against the expenditure of more money. So you would be against Los Angeles spending more money on this program, but they've already got the program in effect.
Right, and what has been the results of the program? What is the research? I've heard several people say that there is scant evidence that this technique works.
Noma, let's ask.
The program that has been implemented is relatively new, and one of the problems that we have when we attempt to combine practice with theory is a need for continuing research as we attempt to identify effective instructional strategies and methodologies. The program in the district has been implemented over a short period of time. We are in the process of developing an assessment tool in conjunction with UCLA that will help us to identify whether or not the methodologies we are employing are effective.
Well, let's talk about a program that's a little bit closer to home. I live in DeKalb County. The DeKalb County schools now have, for 11 years, have a program that's called Home Speak versus School Speak, and it was created by Kelly Harris Wright. And Kelly, why did you see a need and approach it this way in the DeKalb County schools?
Well, the official title of the program is called the Bidialectal Communication Program. The assumption there was that, yes, children bring to us the richness of all the various nuances of the language they've learned. The language that they learned is the language of the community that they've come from, the language that's familiar to them based on what they've learned from families and friends. That language must be recognized, it must be valued, but at the same time, as a public institution, we have the responsibility to help them acquire mainstream communication skills, of which standard language patterns may be appropriate.
And Jeff, you are a teacher. I'm not even going to try and say bilectal very much, but you're a teacher in this program. Did you have to learn Ebonics in order to participate?
No, did not have to learn Ebonics. Basically, the language that they're bringing to school that we call home speech, which is used with family and friends, people that you know very well, we have them code switch into school speech, which is just simply switch what you're saying to standard English for all people to understand in the classroom setting. And
let's get some examples of that. Geneva, I understand that you've got several examples. Why don't you give us several of them and then do what Jeff is calling code switch?
Okay. One example is the pattern you flashed on the screen during the break there, the stressed Ben. He'd been married, which means he has been married for a very long time. He got married a long time ago, and he is still married. If the person says he'd been married without the stress on the Ben, then that means that that person is probably divorced. That is, he once was married in the past, but no longer is. Another example would be the adjacency or context in possessive formation. For example, that was Mr. Johnson's stove got burned down. And the standard of that would be, that was Mr. Johnson's store that got burned down. Actually, there are several patterns in that particular construction, both the voice TH sound becoming a D sound, the possession of Mr. Johnson's stove being done with the juxtaposition of the possessor and the possessed, shall I say.
Susan? So can I jump in here?
Susan, go ahead.
This is well and very legitimate to go around and go through the dialect, the speech patterns in different dialects, but you could do that for across the country. And you could there is Norwellian in New Orleans, there's Irish Brogue, there is Philly that people speak in Philly, there's Pidgin English that people speak in Hawaii, there's Spanglish that people speak in California throughout. And
there's
I
Valley
really,
Speak.
There's all different types of dialects. And I think if we start segregating our country, and English is really the great equalizer. It gives us an open playing field. It's the beauty of what our country, it's a thread that keeps the social fabric of our country together. And this could, I just see this as opening a huge floodgate to teaching teachers in all different dialects across the country.
Noma,
really
a lot of people are worried that, especially in California with all of the languages there, that this could just become blown way out of proportion.
The objective of the programs in Los Angeles, California, I mean, ultimately have one aim, and that is to help youngsters master the language of instruction. Yes, we are a language minority majority, pretty much, in the Los Angeles Unified School District. It is imperative, then, that we provide teachers with comprehensive staff development and training so that they have methodologies and strategies that are going to be employed to effectively move these youngsters towards mastery of the language of instruction.
So what is the best way to move the youngsters towards mastery of the language of the dominant culture? There are several people who disagree about this. Susan and Noma, we know that you have to go. Thank you so much for being here. We sure do appreciate it. Coming up next, you're going to be able to meet a man who says that Ebonics is a waste of time and a waste of money. We're going to talk about that and more next. Welcome back. We're talking about Ebonics, and we are joined with pleasure by Robert Woodson. He is with the Chad School Foundation. It works to educate minority students that are at a disadvantage and is privately funded. And a bunch of people in our audience want to talk to you. They're real excited. So welcome to the discussion. We sure do appreciate it. Yeah. But first, I'd like to go back to Geneva with the question that we just aired on CompuServe, and we had several in the primetime chat last night. I think Donald Brown was one of them. Is it possible to speak, from Susie South now, is it possible to speak Ebonics incorrectly?
Oh, yes, absolutely, because the language has rules and has a grammatical system to it, and people who don't know the rules often speak it incorrectly. In fact, that's one of the ways that people make fun of and make caricatures and stereotypes about speakers of Ebonics. So you can
give
use
us an
it
example.
incorrectly.
Geneva, give us an example of speaking it incorrectly.
If for example, a person said, I hear, versus I'm here, or I'm going to be here, then if they say I hear, that would be incorrect, because that form does not exist. You can say she here, he here, they here, but not I here.
And the child would be corrected in the home for saying that, right?
Well, it's not likely that the child who has grown up in the natural environment learning Ebonics would say that. That's more likely to be used by somebody who's trying to poke fun at a speaker of Ebonics but doesn't really know the rules.
No, but as you're growing up, you don't know all of the rules of the language. So in the home, the child is liable to say something wrong, then the parent or the adult who's around would correct the child. Right?
That's
within
right.
the context of Ebonics.
Within the context of Ebonics, that's
gotcha.
Right. Yes.
Kay Lavelle disagrees with you. Go ahead.
Well, I agree with the gentleman. I think that Ebonics and this whole issue is a waste of time, simply because I think that any young child who speaks Ebonically as a young child, and he further educates himself, he's going to learn the correct way of speaking. And I know that if I'm going to learn to speak Spanish, I'm totally illiterate to Spanish right now. But if I go into a class, they're going to just tell me the right way to speak it. They're not going to take me through all other kind of changes to learn how to speak Spanish correctly.
Okay, but Kayla Vale, the teacher would be able to speak English and Spanish.
Right.
Would you be able to learn better in a class where the teacher could say, Kayla Vale, I have a cat, or my name is, in Spanish, is me llamo, you know,
Yeah, Casa or whatever.
Kayla Vale, okay?
Right.
Would it be better to have them make a bridge like that,
No, it'd be
or
better-
a total immersion Spanish
It would be
class?
better for them to say it the way it's supposed to be said properly, and I have to study to show myself approved to further repetition through repetition. And that's what
Okay.
we have to do with our children, repetition.
Robert Woodson?
Yeah, I think that this is academic hogwash, and it's a scam and a fraud. For us to be sitting here as kids are being killed every day in our school systems, it's another way of deflecting attention away from the critical issue, and that is the content of what is happening to those kids. Those kids and their parents were taught by some of these same teachers who are now blaming the kids. Words are powerful symbols of communicating meaning. Many of us were raised by parents who said to us, that's the wrong way to talk. And we knew that what they meant, their symbols that they used, did not convey their meaning. They loved us, and therefore they were free to correct us. But the reality is why there is no evidence that our kids suffer from a crisis of technique. And that is that Ebonics would, if you look at the literature, no one on the show has said that as a consequence of Detroit schools applying Ebonics for 5 years, that it result in any outcomes. None of the studies. But there are concrete examples. Marva Collins, the Chad School in Newark, the Ivy Leaf School in Philadelphia, the Bessemer School in Wisconsin. All of these teach low-income black kids from those same communities with amazing results. They all achieve. I can give you all kinds of statistics that show that it is possible if you have competent teaching. But
Well,
right now,
let's talk to two of the teachers in our audience. We're going to go to Kelly and Jeff after the break, and we're going to ask you about what Dr. Woodson just said. And also, Rod, I know you wanted to make a comment. We're coming to you also. We'll be back. We are talking about Ebonics and a lively discussion going on here in our audience about the issue, the controversy, etc. Geneva Smitherman, who wrote a book, Black Talk. She's a professor, a very talented woman, is here with us. Also, Robert Woodson. He is with Chad School Foundation, among many other things that you have done. We're debating the whole concept. I promised Rod the first word when we come back, so go ahead.
Yes, I totally agree with Mr. Woodson. I have a 3- and 4-year-old daughter, and the main concerns that I'm faced with right now in reference to my daughters are teen pregnancy, gang violence, drug abuse, and things of this nature. And I feel that, there are only a few minority, a group of people that are putting emphasis on the Ebonics issue. I think if we take that emphasis and put it where it needs to be, put it in reference to things that's going to make a difference, then that would definitely be a contributing factor.
Let's go to
I agree. Let me
Susan, I would like to speak to this, if I may. I think that there's no question about people blaming the victim or blaming the students. What the school districts are saying is that they don't control the social factors. They don't control the means of production and the economy. But they do control the curriculum. They do have children in school with them 7 to 8 hours a day. So they're saying, what can we do with the factors that we have control over that we can try to guarantee that we will save at least some of the children? And so this is what the plan is. All the social factors you mentioned, There's no denying, but the schools are not in control of that. I
Robert
think another
Whitson, go
point
ahead
I
and
want to
jump
say
in.
while I
Let me
have,
just very
I think it's
quickly, Robert
another
Whitson, go ahead
important
and
to
jump
mention
in.
another point very quickly, though, that there is research. There were research studies that were done in the 1970s, for example, that showed that an Ebonics-based approach did work much more effectively to teach reading to students, for example, than an approach that didn't consider Ebonics. In one of these studies that was done in 5 different cities in the north and the southern part of the United States, the students improved 6.2 months in their reading using an Ebonics approach. The students who did not use the Ebonics approach
Absolutely, Robert Whitson, go ahead.
Let me just get in here because...
So there are studies that show that this approach does work.
First of all, I think we are approaching, this is the football season, the end of it. If a football coach and a team had failed to win games for 20 years, they would be fired. Our public school systems have failed to educate their children, and there is no accountability for those teachers. Why should you trust an untested theory when there are endless examples, Marva Collins, the Chad School, others, where black educators, let me finish, where black educators have demonstrated.
The literature is there.
I'm not talking about literature, I'm talking about people and children.
The literature is there that these
This is not a crisis in academic foolishness. I'm talking about live children
You're the one
in
that
live
uses the word
school.
foolishness, not me.
I'm
We're all
saying to
serious
you,
about this.
the
We're trying
Chad
to save
School,
black youth.
let me say to you that that is concrete evidence that people, even in public schools, Mama Hawk in Chicago, a woman who reaches out in a loving way and teaches these children. So there are demonstrated examples. The question is, why wouldn't the Oakland and LA school system bring in Marva Collins, bring in Leon Moore in the Chad School, all of these educators who over the last 30 years have demonstrated that they can effectively teach these children. Why not bring them in? You know why? Because it would jeopardize the power that those teachers and the unions have over the control of the money.
Let's get a comment from a gentleman who's in our audience. William, go ahead.
Okay, I was just wondering why are they going on and arguing, and we're not talking about the issue at hand.
What do you want him to talk about? Go ahead and ask him a question.
Well, I want to get back on the topic of Ebonics and what we were discussing in the beginning.
Okay, so it's a bad idea. Let's go ahead, or at least that's what Robert is saying. Let's go to the Smithsonian. Karen is joining us there. Hey, Karen. You wanted to weigh in? Go ahead.
Hi, I have a question. I was wondering if Ebonics would be taught to all students in the districts where it was being taught. Is the goal to improve communication among all students, or is it more about the teacher-student relationship?
Fred is in our audience, and he wants to talk to you, Karen. Go ahead, Fred.
We're not going to teach, they're not going to teach Ebonics. They're trying to teach children who speak Ebonics how to speak proper English. That's what this is all about.
Is that part of the whole fear about this, the issue of teaching Ebonics versus doing it as a bridge? Do you think that's where some of the controversy is coming from, Fred?
That's the biggest controversy, because people think that we want to teach in America another language that is a sub-level language.
How does that make you feel?
You don't really want to know.
If some white racist...
If you're not going to give voice to it, Fred, who will? This is the whole purpose of Talk Back Live, and your whole purpose.
The gentleman on the screen, he'll give you all you need.
I tell you, I feel his frustration too. If some white racist had come up with a scheme and said that black kids are genetically different, as the Oakland school system did, and therefore their language is genetically based. If some racist had said that, everybody would be picketing and to be an outrage. We would not be sitting here discussing this as
Robert,
if it's
that's
a
an
logical...
academic term, isn't it? That's an academic term.
The term genetically different refers to linguistically different patterns. In fact,
if Charles Murray had said that, you all be cussing this man out.
The Indo-European family of languages, of which English is one member, is descended from has a genetic relationship to other languages of the Indo-European family. And there the word genetic is used, and I'm quoting from just the common college dictionary.
I'm talking about
about English.
We
And
got
they
to
use
take
the
a break.
term genetic.
We got to take a break. Rosalind has a question. We're going to go back to our teachers. As promised before, we got sidetracked. We're going to go back to them. And Lisa, we're also going to talk to you. And is she your daughter? Or you were telling me she's your niece? Okay, Tyra. Oh, how old are you? 1? Well, there you go. She's cute. We're going to be right back. Stuff is about Fred.
Susan.
Wanda, you just slap him on his arm.
Susan, I'd like to make a comment about your comment with the gentleman over there, and you were asking about how would he feel about this being classified as like a sub-language. Well, I like to say that as the black kid at 13 years old who went to a white camp up in Toccoa, Georgia, around a lot of white kids, and I was the only black kid there, and all of these kids were speaking proper English, and I'm speaking what we're calling Ebonics. It wasn't a matter of the fact that I felt bad or inferior, but I felt challenged. And, you know, anytime something is there that you seem to have missed, let's say, in the past in your life, and you need to catch up with it or learn it, you've got to put your ego aside and accept that challenge. And the English language is a challenge, you know, and it's a challenge that's not so bone-crushingly difficult to overcome. I mean, we can do it.
Okay.
Anybody else? Comment? Question?
Bonnie, what you say?
Arsha. Arsh. From Baltimore. The harbor.
The harbor. I think that the ultimate goal here should not be to for everyone that's involved in this discussion to advance their own cause, but to advance the cause of the young black kids who are really the center of the whole issue, to teach them how to speak proper English so that they can advance in the world. Where
Questioning, that's what I'm trying to connect with you. It's not about them and their place in the world. That's coming from a sense of separateness. Because that black kid that's out on the street and got tossed away from society may have the cure to breast cancer when I get it. You know? So it's sort of like the us. You just don't know where the blessings will come. Okay, first to Jenny Knapp's question, teaching to instructors. Geneva, very quickly, you've already delineated some of the research for the students, but to instructors, or does that necessarily matter?
Well, yes, it matters because the instructors have to know what the patterns are and the forms are in order to be able to be effective with the students. And in the program that I mentioned, the instructors were part of the training process. There was another study also done teaching college students academic discourse, and outside of Chicago, done by Honey Taylor. And she showed that the students who used the Ebonics approach were much more able to write and produce academic discourse. That is, they were able to monitor the way they used Ebonics in the discourse and change that than the students who didn't. So the instructors are part of that type of approach.
To the DeKalb program, it's successful. Did you ever have to teach any of these students?
We did not directly teach them Ebonic structures. Many of the children who spoke dialectal features of language may have used features that were particular to black dialect. However, our program perhaps differs from other movements in the nation in that we have all kinds of children in our program, not just African American children. We have Asian children in our program, we have Hispanic children in our program, we have white children in our program, because the underlying premise of our program is effective communication. I think what is important here is the notion that we do not devalue any language form a youngster brings to school, because when we do that, we ultimately devalue that child. And so what we are trying to do is make sure that our teachers understand how to correctly give feedback to a student when they want to suggest a change, so as to not devalue that child by talking about standards of rightness and wrongness, which will ultimately segment rather than join.
Jeff, to you, hold on just a second, Mr. Woodson. Jeff, to you, you're a teacher. How many students are in your class?
Well, I have 200 fifth grade students at the school that I'm in, and I go in to the entire fifth grade class during the language arts section of their day.
Is that all? Is that all 200?
Yes, all 200 students. Not
at one time. I mean, I'm talking about, well, no, I mean, what is your class size when you are teaching students? How many students are we talking about?
right around 23 to 25 students.
Is that hard when there's a whole bunch of them, Asian, black, white, Hispanic?
No, it's not hard because we focus on standard English usage in the classroom. That's what we're teaching to be effective in certain situations, be able to use standard English. We don't make any distinctions according to race whatsoever.
Okay, let's go over to Lisa and her terrific niece that I was looking at, because, you know, after all, it's young adults like Tyra that we're talking about, and this debate is talking about, really, when we get right down to it. Lisa, when your niece grows up, sweetie, I'm going to take your hat off, okay? Yeah, because you look really pretty. What do you want her to be taught? You've been listening to the debate. Ebonics or standard English or both?
I prefer both, because my kids is getting taught both. I prefer both. That way, when they get older and get grown and decide to go to Paris or somewhere like that, they know how to speak the language. Mm-hmm. So I prefer both languages.
Okay, variety of language skills there. Question from Rosalind. Go ahead.
My question is for the gentleman in Washington, and it is, do you not agree that these African Americans are distinctly disadvantaged when entering the workforce because of this way of talking, and that it would have to be erased or cured in some way for them to compete with other people for jobs? And if so, then what would be an alternative you would offer, since you oppose this particular program?
Okay. We're going to come back with solutions. I apologize. We got to take a break. Mr. Woodson, you're first. We're going to come back with solutions after this. If you're in the Atlanta area, for free tickets, call 1-800-410-4CNN. Robert Woodson, to you, suggestions.
Second. Yes, I think, first of all, someone said if you keep doing the same thing the same way, you keep getting the same results. So we really got to engage in innovation. And innovation is looking around the nation to find out where there are islands of excellence in the black community, like the various private and some public schools, where black kids from these environments, in some cases, both parents are on drugs. In some cases, they are not. We need to go to the real experts. Right there in California, Jaime Escalante was celebrated 20 years ago. Where's the Jaime Escalante Institutes? Why don't we have Jaime Escalante schools throughout the system? Instead, he is treated like a rogue, an outsider. So he demonstrated 20-some years ago that kids from these neighborhoods can be taught if you believe that they can be taught. And respect for them is not so much how you talk with them, it's what you do in their presence, to what extent do you embrace them. The final recommendation I would make, I think we need to get parents involved. All we have heard from is educators that have a proprietary interest in the system. We need to hear what parents want, give them the power to hire and fire their teachers, and another thing is make the teachers send their children to these schools if they teach in that system, and you'll see a revolution in education in this country.
Couple of faxes. First one from John in Michigan: to separate Ebonics as a language in itself is to encourage racial segregation. And then this from Lydia in New York: Ebonics is a giant step backward for blacks. It will separate them further from the mainstream business and corporate world. Geneva?
Several misconceptions here need to be cleared up. First of all, when the Oakland School District said that they were going to declare Ebonics as the primary language, in a sense it doesn't really make any difference. It didn't make any difference whether they said that or not, because objectively that situation already exists. That is, people already speak Ebonics. Some 80 to 90% of members of the black community at one point in their lives or others speak Ebonics. And this includes older people. It's not just the speech of teenagers. It's the speech of basic working class people in the black community. It's the speech of my father, who made me everything that I am, who's a basic working class person, who also happens to be a minister. So the language already exists. It is not something that the Oakland resolution is going to create. It already exists.
And that is the final word. I'm sorry, but we are out of time. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks to all of our guests earlier. We sure do appreciate it. Thanks to the folks at the Smithsonian. Always a pleasure to have you. And all of you for joining us. Tomorrow, after O.J. and the Olympic Park bombing case, just how much does public opinion affect the law? Are the parents of Jean-Benet Ramsey better off hiring their own PR team and investigators to help solve the crime? Plus, the latest in the case. Tomorrow, 3 Eastern. Flip is up next with the weather, and then Inside Politics with the latest on the Newt Gingrich ethics probe. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow.